Hello and a warm welcome, everybody. It's Carolina Iwa from the Climate Pact Ambassadors u.lab Hub. I'm here together with Kasia Balucka-Debska from DG CLIMA and Kenneth Hogg from the Presencing Institute. Kasia is the one who's responsible for the Climate Pact, and Kenneth, you've been a great friend supporting us with the Presencing Institute and implementing the u.lab and hosting the u.lab Hub with the Climate Pact Ambassadors. Where we are in the u.lab 1X cycle is kind of midway, and we thought to ourselves that this is a fantastic moment to see how can we collectively encourage each other to stop being the ones who are just receiving the theory and are being, like enjoying it and impressed by it or irritated by it at times, and how can we make this step to implementing it with our ecosystems. And Kasia, you're the best person to be the one to actually ask questions to Kenneth, because you're the one who's also exactly in that position. How do I go from going like, oh, this might be useful, to actually implementing it in your work? So guys, I'm just going to leave the floor to you, for the both of you, to try to figure it out, and for the rest of us to join you on our way, and for everybody else watching us right now. I really want the back of your head to begin thinking, how can I reach out to my audiences and how can this support me in doing that? Kasia, over to you.
Many thanks, Carolina. Yes, I have a lot of questions. It's true. Trying to figure out how, in the context of the European Commission, which is a public service, which is quite a big public service, and where we have a lot of work that is usually more regulatory and on policies, how to engage with stakeholders and citizens, and how can we do the bottom up that we talk about a lot nowadays. Everybody realizes that for climate policy, unless we manage to engage properly with people, we won't be able to go fast enough. So my first question, Kenneth, to you is, when you were still in public service in Scottish government, how did you come across theory U, and how did you decide that was it, and that you wanted to work with it?
Thank you, and thank you also to you, Carolina, for inviting me to this conversation. Yeah, so I have been a director for over 10 years in the Scottish government, and the thing which I have spent most of my time doing over that period of time, and also before, is being involved with leading change in public services. Also engaging with the private sector and the not-for-profit sector. But the common thread throughout most of my experience has been leading change. And I first came across u.lab in 2015, when u.lab was just beginning. And at that point in my work, I was looking to expand the range of tools and methodologies which we were using to support us in leading change, because it seemed to me that my experience was telling me that the ways that we were using until that point were necessary, but they were not enough by themselves. So, for example, I had been involved in leading change in public health systems. I had been involved in leading change in healthcare systems, in public transport systems. I had been involved in leading reform of policing and fire and rescue services in Scotland. I had been working with local government, and I had been working extensively with the not-for-profit sector as well. And in all of these situations where we were trying to lead change together, my experience was telling me that having a really good business case is important, but it's not enough. Having really good project management is important, but it's not enough. Having really good financial and risk management is important, but it's not enough by itself. And there was a missing piece for me. And so I was on a journey kind of looking around for other methodologies which should address that missing piece. And the missing piece was, I think, to do with a couple of areas. One was many of the methodologies that existed seemed to me basically just to perpetuate the status quo. Maybe a bit faster or a bit better, but they seem to be leading to incremental improvement, not transformational change. And what we needed in Scotland in so many areas is transformational change. For example, trying to tackle inequality in society. The other area that I felt was missing from some of the existing methodologies was an appreciation that at the end of the day, you cannot remove yourself as a player in the change process. That myself is part of the work, and it's important to recognize the interior work that needs to be done within ourselves in order to do the exterior work. And I can say more about that in a few moments, but those two things seem to me to be addressed by u.lab. So u.lab's about turning ideas into action, number one. It's about leading change from a sense of the emerging future, number two, not looking back. And number three, it addresses the interior condition as well as the exterior work. So that's what led me to try u.lab for the first time in 2015.
And how does one then create space within public service for an innovative tool like this one? As you know, usually our tenders or our methodologies are much more traditional.
Yeah, so well, I think there are different aspects to that question. At a technical level, there is how do you make space to do the learning, and I participated myself in the first u.lab along with a few of my colleagues, and then in subsequent years, more and more people participated in u.lab. And doing u.lab itself requires a few hours each week, but in a business context, it's no more than making any other commitment to a project, which requires a few hours each week. So that, if it's important to you, if it's a priority, it's possible to manage that. But of course, not everybody needs to go through the u.lab process. And in many ways, the most important step is what you do with the methodology which you learn. And what you do with that isn't say to people, oh, you need to go and do a program called u.lab. That might be an option for them. But what you do with it is to begin to use the methodologies which you've learned. And actually making space for that can be as simple as convening meetings differently, organizing conversations differently. It can be as simple as listening differently, or generating ideas for action differently. Things which you're doing already with stakeholders, but you begin to do them differently. And therefore it becomes more about a shift in the quality of that work rather than just adding more work into an already busy diary.
And in terms of especially like the setup and the governance and your bosses at the time, did they needed convincing, or you had a free hand to try things and then, as you said, start working on them sort of step by step?
Yeah, so I guess I would say there's not much to be convinced about. So this is a program which is free to participants, so there's no money involved. It doesn't cost anything to participate in it. All it costs is people's time. It's something which you can also do mostly in your own time if you want to. You can download and use the materials at a time that suits you. It doesn't have to be at a set time every day or every week. But as we say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So the thing that is most persuasive to people is not whether an idea looks like it's attractive or not, it's whether it works in practice. And really, over the course of just 2 or 3 short months, what we saw happening in Scotland was people beginning to turn ideas into action. So the way that we used u.lab in Scotland was to use it as a platform for community-led change. We, as a government, we didn't ask people to work on any particular issues. Instead, we simply convened people and invited them to use this as a way to support them to lead change about things that mattered to them. And what they used it for was up to them. So some people used it to support small businesses in rural areas. Some people used it to lead place-based work, for example, creating more jobs in particular communities. Some people used it in public services, such as in the integration of health and social care. Other people used it in academia. People used it for all different sorts of things. And really, the invitation was to people, if you doubt whether doing more of the same is going to get you the results that you want, then maybe try this. If you already believe that what you're doing is going to get you the results you need, that's fine, keep doing that. But if you're really questioning whether more of the same is going to be enough, then this is an approach which is explicitly designed to support people to access a sense of the emerging future that is more relevant to what's happening right now and for tomorrow, and to bring to life change which is anchored in that moment. And actually people responded to that really positively. And so, as I say, over two to three short months, people began to turn ideas into action. And my colleagues began to see examples all across Scotland of people developing what we call prototypes, so small scale initiatives, testing very quickly ideas to see if they work, and then building on them depending on the results.
And once you've seen this, because you said that your role as a government, since you haven't asked them, it wasn't like a contract with them, it was an offer. So you convene them, you enable the platform for networking. Once you have started seeing these projects emerging, was there then more that you wanted to do for them, or you were able to do for them, and that we should, for instance, start thinking about for our ambassadors?
Yeah, so I might actually just comment on that first point that you raised about the role of government. And I think this applies to other organizations too. So people tend to have expectations of how governments should behave. And that applies to people like myself as civil servants. And in many ways, this sort of approach is not the traditional approach, because it's very important that the position that you're adopting is not trying to persuade people to do something. We weren't trying to persuade people of a particular point of view. We were instead trying to create the conditions, or to build, if you like, a container for conversations, which would help them to do what they want to do. And it didn't matter whether people wanted to do different things, or even things which had a slightly different purpose to them. This was not about an exercise in trying to achieve consensus, which governments often do. This was an exercise in tapping into people's intrinsic motivations to bring the energy and talent and commitments which they have to things that they care about in service of leading change, particularly around communities of place or communities of interest. So it did require myself and my colleagues to change our stance in many ways, and to free ourselves up from a sense of responsibility to think that we always need to bring the answers. Actually, in this case, we needed to bring the questions. Because, to go back to where we came from, by definition, we were using this for issues where we did not believe that we had sufficient reason to expect that more of the same would get us the results that we wanted. We wanted something different. So why would we insist that we continue to do what we'd seen before?
really like
can you remind?
Sorry, I
Sorry,
really like that part, the freeing yourself from having answers. Thank you for that.
And you know, I mean, I would say in all honesty, Kasia, that this, you know, as a civil servant, and I had spent at that point, I don't know, 25 years as a civil servant, that can make one feel quite vulnerable because you're no longer saying to, well, you're no longer using many of the tools that you're used to using. And governments and local governments and other institutions often have sort of top-down authority. In the case of governments, they can persuade parliaments to even change the law. But this is nothing to do with top-down change. This is about mobilizing and galvanizing change via a different process. And therefore, you know, that's where the point about the self comes in. That at the end of the day, it comes down to, do people believe you when you say, we're not trying to persuade you to do something specific? You know, the quality of your intention has to be, it has to have integrity, you know, and you need to be able to communicate why you're doing this in a way that's true and that people understand and that's credible. So, I mean, I would say that's true for anyone involved in u.lab work. And you know, most people don't work in governments, but for example, one of the key components of u.lab are the hubs, and indeed the climate ambassadors, I think, are involved in u.lab hubs. Some people act as hub hosts, and that's something which, you know, is a possibility for ambassadors to do in future runs of u.lab, for example. And right now, other people are doing hub hosting. It's the exact same thing for hub hosts. You know, one of the key qualities for a hub host is not trying to jump into the content of the ideas that people are trying to bring forward and to influence them or to help them, but it's to hold open the space to allow something creative and generative to happen, and to build that container for the conversation in an impartial way, where the hub host or the facilitator is really leaving their own opinions at the door when they walk in. And that's really important for this work. And I mean, one of the things we said at the start of this conversation was how people take the next step from ideas into action. And I think that's one of the most important principles. When people want to maybe work with a small group, so maybe it's time to take my idea, which I've been developing, and share it with 2 or 3 other people, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, a small group of people. What have I learned from u.lab about what will help me to do that? Is it, hi guys, let me try to persuade you that I've had a really great idea, and here are all the reasons why it's the answer? Or am I going to engage with them in a different way to try to connect with them at a level of what matters to them, and then begin to co-create something together? So this question about the stance that you take, I think, is really important, both in u.lab itself, but also in terms of what you do next.
I think it's very important what you said about connecting to people at the level it matters to them, because indeed we all, but especially you know, when you're responsible for something, and then here I am, for instance, in this sort of double role of being responsible for the pact, but wanting to connect where it matters to the people who make up the pact. I really appreciate this advice and comment from you, because I think this is the key, actually. And so this move from ideas to action, where have you seen this moment, and then where have you seen the impact that made you the most happy, where you were like, yes, it made sense?
So I think the thing that has made me the most happy is just seeing the diversity of people who have engaged in this. I remember at the end of our first ever u.lab in Scotland, I at least it was the one after the one that I participated in, and it ran between October and December in 2015. I remember we held an event in December. It was just before Christmas, for people to come and celebrate what they'd been doing over the last 3 months. And I remember a big room of people, maybe 150 people. We hosted it in a university building, and you know, sometimes Scottish people can be quite reserved. We can be quite, you know, we don't like to speak up too much sometimes. And in this room, we were asking people to share what they had done, and literally pass a microphone from one person to the next, and just in 1 minute each share what they had done. And I remember seeing these queues of people forming up to take the microphone in a very un-Scottish way. And it was just wonderful to see the enthusiasm and the energy that they were bringing to the work. And they had done things because they cared about it. And, you know, that was part of the qualitative difference about this approach. It wasn't people being asked to do things or told to do things. It was people being given a method to realize things that they wanted to do, make changes that they wanted to make. So that's the thing that has given me the most pleasure. Can you remind me of your other question, Kasia, that you asked before then?
No, it was, you know, when magic
examples
happens, and examples.
Yeah,
exactly.
Examples, yeah. So for example, so I'll take some examples from Scotland, which happened in those early years, although a lot has happened since. So directly from u.lab, we had people, for example, who, I remember one project where we had a company, a small design company, wanted to increase the quality of its design thinking by introducing and accessing the thinking of older people. And they did it. They tapped into the wisdom by accessing older people in the community in doing their work. I remember another project where somebody wanted to integrate some of this learning in how we trained teachers, school teachers in Scotland. I remember another project where some people who were involved in caring for older people used these methodologies to reorganize how they carried out their work in Scotland. There were lots of small examples which came to life very quickly. At a larger scale, I would say that I've used this methodology in larger scale change programs. So for example, I have worked with policing in Scotland, and we have used this methodology in supporting the creation and the development of a single national police force for Scotland. That was a change which took place in 2013, but the full implementation of that program took some years. And this is an approach which has been used in that. And one of the core components, of course, is that you are then co-creating the future together, and therefore tapping into the range of expertise and talents that existed within the police force and within the police service, rather than government or any other organization trying to impose its view alone of what should happen. And of course, when the experts and the frontline practitioners are involved in creating the final product, it's of a much higher quality and much more effective.
Kenneth, I really love your examples and I appreciate them. And I'm connecting to our ambassadors in the hub and kind of listening to you through their ears, thinking, wow, you know, like that sounds all very impressive, but it also sounds very advanced and kind of ready. And to anybody who might be listening to you right now and being impressed, you know, like I wonder if there are maybe any inspirations of what people who go like, oh, I did half of the module 1, I had a look at the module 2, but I'm not so safe on my feet yet. Is there anything that you could actually, you know, like propose to them and tell them, look, this is an easy way to engage with your ecosystem. How about you try this and that? Because often, you know, like just making the first step is all we need, because we know it. We just need the first step.
Yeah, so one of the first things that we learned was if you want to spread ideas, or if you want to engage a wider group of people, rather than trying to choose, I want them and them and them, instead you use your existing networks and you go where the energy is. So one simple thing people can do is, if they're saying, if I'm sitting here and I'm only partway through the program and I'm not feeling confident about what I do next, but I do know that I want to begin a conversation about something, and I want to maybe practice listening differently as part of that conversation. Of course, that next step can begin now, but what matters, I would say, is it doesn't, in an odd sort of way, it doesn't really matter who shows up to the conversation. What matters is the quality of the invitation. So I would say just go to your existing networks, explain what you're interested in doing, create a general invitation and see who comes. And then whoever comes is the right people. Whoever shows up are the ones who have had their interest piqued by what you've said, and that's where you begin the conversation. You know, when we first began using u.lab as a platform for change in Scotland, in the very beginning, I think I was trying to funnel people into topics, maybe. So, you know, here's the area for the climate change conversation. Here's the area for the, I don't know, health and social care conversation. Here's the area for the business conversation. And you can do that, but it's not really in keeping with the spirit of the process. But also, actually, what happened is that very often the most innovative ideas straddle these boundaries. And why would I want to shut that down? So we stopped doing that, and instead we simply invited networks saying, here's a conversation happening about this general area. You know, please come and join us, and then see who comes. So start with your existing networks and then begin the conversation with those who come, rather than worrying about getting the right people. That should be one recommendation. Another would be simply to integrate some of the u.lab practices into your everyday life or working life. So an obvious one would be listening practices. It's such a foundational thing for this way of working. You know, going into a conversation with somebody with the intention of, by the end of the conversation, being able to have some sort of a felt sense of what it's like to be them. Just do that for half an hour in one conversation. And frankly, if all you ever do is become good at that, then wow, that's amazing. I'm still working on that. So, you know, it's not like you need to have, you know, ticked all the boxes and boom, you're done. You're now a qualified u.lab practitioner and you're ready to face the world. It doesn't work like that. It's more of a lifelong approach, I guess. And I mean, I would also say that u.lab brings together lots of thinking over a number of decades from different places, and it integrates it all together. So it's not a small amount of learning that you're being asked to absorb. It's a lot. So take it in bite-sized pieces.
Yes, no, absolutely. I was actually going to ask you to finish this conversation about main advice, and you have started going already into the main advice and into the steps. But so maybe one or two more specific ones in terms of like climate action. Throughout the u.labs and throughout your experience, you have seen different processes. And in terms of climate action, what what would be like the most important you have seen that maybe we can already learn from or connect to?
So this is a really good example of what I was talking about earlier. So the civil servant in me, which I can't get rid of because it's been there for a long time, wants to say, well, I saw this strategy implemented in this place and I did the following things and that's the answer.
Yes.
And that's the wrong answer.
Yes.
Because everything is specific to its situation. And, you know, it's not true that you can transplant ideas freely from different places to different places, because people are different, cultures are different, you know, everything is contextually specific. So I think the most important piece of advice that I've learned is, in climate change or any other issue, if you have gone through a U process, at the heart of that is increasing the level of your awareness about an issue. You are creating the space to allow yourself to sense differently into the issue you're inquiring about. And you have temporarily suspended your pre-existing assumptions and beliefs about what the right answer is. And you've given yourself the space, the luxury of just sensing with a deeper quality of awareness into something. And out of that moment, hopefully, has come an idea or a sense or an image or a feeling. It doesn't matter what came to you in those moments. What matters to you is that you can remain authentic to that. So my main advice would be, whatever you do next, please don't default back to the thinking that you had at the start of the program, because that's easier. I'll just go back to that project that I was already working on before. Instead, my main advice would be, whatever the image or the idea was that came to you when you allowed yourself to access that deeper level of understanding, that's the place to begin your next conversation. That's the place to begin engaging other people with and generating a prototype at the smallest possible level of scale. So the first one is remain, my first point is remain true to that. And my second point is, do not rush to a big scale thing at all. Keep it at the smallest minimum viable level. And if that means, you know, doing one thing in the next 2 days, do that one thing in the next 2 days and then review how it went. But keeping connection with that sense of the source of my thinking is probably the most important thing to do. Now, you will know better than I do what that might look like in the climate action area. But, you know, I'm just imagining if I am, I don't know, a trade union official working in, I don't know, Germany, or if I am an elected council, municipality council official in Italy, or if I am running a small business in Spain, the things that my sense of future possibility could be very, very different in each case. But that's the thing that deserves being brought to life. Respect that seed of an idea and nurture it and grow that and do it a day at a time, 2 days at a time, 3 days at a time, a week at a time, really small steps, and see where it gets you, so that hopefully by the time you have something that might be called a project, it's something which even the idea of that was never available to you at the start of the process.
Thank you so much to both of you, Kasia and Kenneth, finishing with connecting to the sense of future possibility as a daily practice. I think that's beautiful. I think if we all manage to actually integrate it to these random moments when we're maybe standing in a line and waiting for something, And there's nothing else in that moment requiring our attention. And if we just connect it in that moment and practice that muscle, what is it in the future that is calling my attention now and now and now? Thank you so much and see you down the road.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you soon in the u.lab.